There are forces of good and forces of evil at work in the world today. What are these forces? Who is responsible for the good? And who is responsible for the evil? Richard Shaw talks about current events which are rarely discussed by the mainstream media, events that affect us all. This program seeks to identify, to inform, and to equip the believer for what's ahead. Welcome to What in the World is Going On?
We are pro-Christian, pro-life, pro-Second Amendment, pro-American, and here only by the grace of God. Just what is the condition of our president? Is there something wrong with him? Well, if you watch any news broadcasts that I've seen, if you do any extensive work at all, you know there's a lot of thought that things may not just be right. I'm going to go back. I've had a wealth of information come in, but I'm going to go back just a couple of weeks where Sean Hannity asked, is there something medically wrong with Joe Biden? What's going on with the President of the United States? It was on Sean Hannity. He weighed in on the growing questions surrounding Joe Biden's light schedule and lack of press, the briefings, and asking if there was something medically wrong with the President of the United States. A quote from Hannity, he said, and I'm quoting, he's struggling to keep his focus. He's digging in deep, locking in just to get through those prepared remarks. He does one of these a day, and it looks like he needs a nap. Continuing a quote from Sean Hannity, truth be told, Joe had nothing to do with the $1.9 trillion payoff bill. Joe's not totally fine. Our sources say that panic is set in at the White House. He added, quoting, what is going on with the President of the United States of America? Is there something medically wrong here? We've got a right to know. Is there something medically wrong with Joe Biden? Well, Dan Bongino was on Hannity about the same time. He stopped by and to weigh in on the escalating questions surrounding Biden's fitness for office, saying a cognitively impaired person has access to America's nuclear arsenal. Have we got a right to know? Who knew what and when, asked Hannity. Bongino said, quote, this is a national security concern. We may have a cognitively impaired president of the United States, one who's at the fingertip away from the nuclear codes. Is this not the most important question we could be thinking of? Is there another question that matters more right now? A quote, again, and on Sean Hannity. And just as shocking as all of this, did you see Joe Biden's delivery speech on the anniversary of the COVID-19 lockdowns? But, if you did watch it, if you happen to watch it on YouTube, there were only 7,141 people that tuned in the White House when he gave this speech. Of course, he doesn't draw much of a crowd, or didn't even during the campaign, did he? Well, Joe Biden delivered his first fiery address as U.S. president on the anniversary of the COVID lockdowns. As I mentioned, there was only 7,100 people that tuned him in on the YouTube page. It was highly staged, During that, Biden lied about President Trump doing nothing to address the threat. He also lied about Asian Americans being harassed during the China virus pandemic. And he did forget to mention the illegal aliens with COVID that he's busing across the country, not even testing them at the border. And also just a couple of weeks ago, Dick Morris was on Newsmax TV. He noted that Biden is the rooster taking credit for the dawn. Yeah. President Joe Biden gets a D or maybe even an F for his first national address. He was hailing something that former President Donald Trump did for him. This, according to presidential strategist Dick Morris. He was on Newsmax TV. Don't give me all this stuff is a result of you, Morris told guest host Sebastian Gorka. This is the rooster, as I've said, taking credit for the dawn. The quip was saying that Biden's boastful statements about his pandemic response with respect to vaccines are largely because of the Trump administration's Operation Warp Speed, that it was made possible, leading America to a new dawn in the fight against the global pandemic. There's one line that made me want to choke the television set, Morris told Gorka. That was when he said, quote, "For months they didn't develop the vaccine and distribute it. They had it for months and millions of Americans were not vaccinated," end quote. Well, Morris pointed out, they had it for 3 damn weeks, my friend. Morris noted once the Food and Drug Administration approved the emergency use authorizing for the Pfizer vaccine, the shots had been shipped and going into Americans' arms. That was just about 3 short weeks before Biden was inaugurated, Morris noted. They had it for 3 weeks while Trump was president, and on the day that Trump left the office, on January 21st, when he handed it over, 1.5 million Americans were vaccinated on that day, Morris added. He also ripped as a pharmacist in chief for suggesting vaccinating people was the biggest challenge, as opposed to researching, development, testing, and the vetting it for efficiency and safety. And you know, that all happened under Trump. Get off it, guy, Morris said. The fact Biden officially signed the $1.9 trillion spending package just hours earlier, but it was a non-event in Biden's 23-minute speech, struck Morris as kind of noteworthy. It should have been the focal point, that speech, of telling the American people how this bloated package was going to help. Another observation from Dick Morris. The military have something for what Biden did. It was called stolen valor. That's when you take the conduct of somebody else and claim it for yourself. Taking credit for what Trump had done on the vaccine for something he had done. Stolen valor. Handlers really got upset. Did you see it when they rushed out? This was in the room with Biden. They rushed him out of the room immediately after the bill signing. That's the COVID 1.9 trillion. Right after there, President Biden once again refused to answer questions from the press during a signing ceremony inside the Oval Office, leaving his handlers to escort members of the press out of the room. "Got it. Thank you all," said Biden after signing the massive stimulus package. Reporters immediately asked the president to comment on the escalating crisis at the border, on COVID-19 vaccinations, and other pressing matters. "Thank you, guys. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, guys. Come on, guys. Let's go. Let's go. Let's go." Those were the handlers getting the press out. And there it is again. Biden does not take questions from shouting reporters after signing the $1.9 trillion stimulus package. What a joke. Like good, obedient sheep, reporters leave after Biden's handlers shout them down and escort them out. And by the way, folks, that $1.9 trillion, 9.1% of it had to do with the pandemic. A lot of pork in there. Yes, sir. You good residents of the red states, those Republican states where you've got reasonably balanced budgets, you're going to lose it under that bill. It's going to places like California, New Jersey, New York, Illinois. Yep. The results of your good governor going to bail out the Dems once again. I've got something here that came in to me from Drew Allen. I didn't know who Drew Allen was, so I checked it a little bit. He's a Texas-bred, Californian-based conservative author and speaker. He does a weekly blog promoting conservative ideals. Wrote this that I got just recently. Is Biden's mental decline a Democratic strategy and not a Democratic problem? Biden versus Trump. The effectiveness of their press secretaries. It's no secret that Joe Biden is not in charge of the executive branch. From Drew Allen. nor does it come as a surprise. The only observable difference between the 2020 presidential hopeful Joe and 2021 presidential Joe is a change of address. He moved from a basement somewhere in Delaware to a basement at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. In fact, a benign question from a pathetic journalist today as to what type of ice cream Joe is eating would be received with a standing ovation. What is surprising, however, is how effective and how advantageous his non-presidency has been for the Democratic Party. His mental incapacitation has not hindered the leftist sinister Marxist agenda. You know, the one they're trying to transform America with? They're trying to take us from a constitutional republic to a totalitarian state. While Joe's mental impairment remains the elephant in the room for Democrats and their propagandists in the media, those who refuse to acknowledge the obvious, we don't need them to confirm what we can see with our own eyes and hear with our own ears. Whether it's Joe admitting on camera that he has no idea what he's signing as he signs an executive order, or Joe forgetting his defense secretary's name, Joe giving an unprecedented 0 press conferences, or even Joe's reneging promise to deliver an address to a joint session of Congress in February. It all demonstrates and proves one thing. Joe Biden is really unfit for the office he nominally holds. But so long as Joe remains the president, even if it's misunderstood as merely a figurative role, the Democrats will continue to have wild success in their diabolical and unconstitutional efforts to destroy our country. There's reason that those who are not too mentally challenged are, in fact, challenging Biden. It's already been proven to be a far more effective radical Marxist than even Obama was. Oh, yes. Barack Obama also held a Democratic majority in the legislature during his first 2 years in office. In fact, Barack Obama's mental state was a handicap to the unpopular radical agenda of the left. When Barack Obama signed a flurry of executive orders and championed questionable and unconstitutional legislation, he still was expected to answer to the American people. He was a sharp guy. He had to answer. What would we have thought otherwise? Sure, Obama was radical. The American people still remained partially uninformed. At least some diffusion of knowledge took place as Obama was expected to explain and defend his agenda. And he did take questions from the press. Even those of us who are most vocal and studied critics of Joe's obvious mental decline must also admit that the very thing we demand, a president, for example, we cannot have. We're living in a nightmare scenario. It's like trying to cancel some subscription service or seeking answers to some technical issue and being put on hold. Endless transfer from one unintelligible party to another and never getting any answers or resolution. We've all had it on the phone, haven't we? Well, in the absence of a president, we take our questions and concerns to who? You got it. Jen Psaki. Well, she would benefit from the excuse of dementia, wouldn't she? But her challenge is not mental. It's not a mental decline. It's unfortunately inability to communicate, a lack of preparedness in part due to her lack of a boss in the Oval Office, and of course, she is limited by her own IQ. Like the worst hotel concierge or IT specialist, her response to everything is, quote, "I'll circle back on that," end quote. That better translates to, "I have no idea. I'm as unqualified and unfit as my boss, Joe Biden." It's also damning proof that there's a vacuum in the White House. You've seen it. I can remember seeing her back when she was press secretary for the State Department under Obama. She was a puke back then, too. Well, anyway, today's situation, what's the upshot? The American people and our country have been plunged into darkness. We've largely no idea what's going on. Well, we can speculate as to who's actually running the country. Could it be Obama? Or lately it's been rumored to be Susan Rice. We all have no access to the one individual responsible for the literal destruction of our economy, our safety, and our freedoms. America is being run by a shadow government in absence of any actual leader. We can't even rely on the limited defense of pressuring and demanding accountability from a titular leader of the executive branch. Joe Biden's nomination was due to his unspecifical appeal to the moderate Democrat and the basement strategy employed to bolster his chances of victory. While we could reluctantly applaud the Democrats' proven ability for a long-term strategy, I don't believe they ever calculated the then unknown benefits of a mentally impaired president. We cannot simultaneously admit that Biden is mentally unfit for the presidency and simultaneously expect that he fulfills his duties. This is the bizarre dilemma that we now face. So long as Biden remains in office, those Americans who religiously watch CNN and get their propaganda from the Washington Post will never be exposed to anything remotely resembling reality. While Joe Biden continues to be largely hidden from the public view and protected by his handlers from facing questioning, and Psaki continues to carry out her circle back strategy, those of us who do demand answers and those who wish to live in reality will be forced to continue this unsufferable existence in the twilight zone or purgatory. Joe Biden is a strategist for the Democrat Party at this point, not a hindrance or a frustration. As the rag known as the Washington Post declares, quote, democracy dies in darkness. Well, we're living in darkness. I regret to say that we'd be better off with Kamala Harris. At least, if she was president, there'd be no unspoken excuse, either understood or accepted, for this un-American and totalitarian regime. But if the Democrats are smart, they'll keep Joe around. They'll keep him around as long as they can. And it's official now, just breaking. Joe Biden is going to hold his first solo press conference on March 25th, 64 days into his presidency. Just came out, again, from Sean Hannity, Fox News. President Biden will hold his first formal news conference on Thursday afternoon, March 25. Psaki announced this past Tuesday, March 16th. At 55 days into the new presidency, many had begun to wonder why Biden had not held a solo news service, separating him from over a dozen of his most recent predecessors. The stretch of over 7 weeks is the longest period a new president has gone without meeting with the media in the last 100 years. We're helping make history. We're watching it happen. Yeah, Biden has gone 48 days as president without funding a formal news conference. During the past administrations, it took President Trump 28 days to hold a press conference, only 21 days for former President Obama, 34 days for former President George Bush. CNN's Jake Tapper tweeted that Biden's 15 most recent predecessors all held a formal solo press conference within 33 days of taking office. And yes, Biden has not yet addressed a joint session of Congress either, another early-term priority in most administrations. Typically, presidents give their first speech before Congress in February. It's not a snubbing. A quote from Psaki. She promised reporters this when asked about Biden not yet addressing the legislators. She does point out that he's going to hold a press conference, and now she can announce it. Meanwhile, Biden is set to deliver his first prime-time address as president to commemorate the one-year anniversary of the COVID-19 shutdowns. The World Health Organization declared the novel coronavirus a pandemic on March 11th, 2020. The president will deliver his first primetime address to commemorate the one-year anniversary of the COVID-19 shutdown on Thursday, March 25th, Psaki quoted and announced. He'll discuss the many sacrifices the American people have made over the last year and the grave loss communities and families across the country have suffered. Her quote. She continued, Psaki did, to say, and I quote, the president will look forward, highlighting the role that Americans will play in beating the virus and moving the country toward getting back to normal. Again, folks, Thursday, March 25th, his first major address since Inauguration Day. You all know who Matt Gaetz is. He's a congressman from the north part of the panhandle of Florida. Good Republican. Kind of reminds you, got a lot of teeth when you see him on the television. Kind of reminds you of the smile of the late President Kennedy. Well, he drops a bombshell. He's pointing out that Biden may have already started transitioning to Harris. In an interview this week on Steve Bannon's War Room Pandemic, Republican Representative Matt Gaetz of Florida was asked about a recent Rasmussen poll that showed that 50% of Americans are not confident that Joe Biden is physically and mentally up to the job of being President of the United States. Matt remarked, and I'm quoting, "I think it is reasonable to ask if the transition to Harris has already begun. With Biden's pushing her to meet more and more world leaders, with Democrats on the Armed Services Committee sending a letter to Biden wanting to diminish his ability to have full control over the nuclear arsenal, we're seeing a Joe Biden who I think is diminished," the congressman said. "When you look at the procedures underway, it would not be unreasonable to think that we won't see Joe Biden as a candidate in 2024. We'll see Kamala Harris running for re-election as the incumbent." Gaetz is on response. Spot on. Many have speculated that Biden's handlers kept him in his basement throughout the campaign to limit the public exposure to his mental decline. And now that Biden is commander-in-chief, he's remained mostly out of sight, earning the nickname Hidin' Biden. Biden, who's been in office for much more than 6 weeks, has still not held a solo news conference. That's the longest any president has gone in over a century. This is a point of frustration even for his establishment media allies, such as the Washington Post, Vanity Fair, and CNN. Many believe Biden is intentionally being shielded from querulous reporters in order to conceal his mental deterioration. Indeed, those occasions where he has ventured out in public have only reinforced the impression that Biden's cognitive capacity is fading. During his recent visit to W.S. Jenkins's son, that's a D.C. hardware store, the traveling press corps began asking questions. Biden seemed entirely lost and remained frozen until his handlers quickly ushered the reporters away. This came on the heels of a White House event where Biden could not recall the name of the Pentagon or the defense secretary, who he publicly referred to as, quote, "the guy who runs that outfit over there," end quote. While Biden's defender argued that these are mere gaffes, some of the rest of us aren't quite so sure. Last month, nearly 36 House Democrats sent a letter to Biden asking him to relinquish his unilateral authority over the nuclear launch codes. The letter, which expressed concern that past presidents exhibited behavior that causes other officials to express concern about the president's judgment, suggests that those in Biden's own party have misgivings about his fitness for office. Similarly, a bipartisan group of senators recently introduced a bill to rein in Biden's war powers. That raised a few eyebrows. Couple this with the fact that Harris is assuming important foreign policy responsibilities independent of Biden, that typically are handled by the president, such as taking direct calls from foreign leaders. And it starts to make sense that Gaetz is openly wondering whether a transition of power is occurring. The idea that Biden is simply a figurehead, a placeholder who just needs to bide some time until Harris can take her seat behind the resolute desk, it's not all far-fetched. Nor is the idea that this was a part of a plan all along. As a U.S. Senator, Harris was ranked by GovTrack as the most politically left member of the whole Senate. However, her radical views and other shortcomings caused her to perform dismally in the Democrat presidential primaries. Harris was unable to competitively fundraise or generate sustained enthusiasm for her candidacy. At the time she dropped out, she was registering in the low single digit, and she hadn't secured a single delegate. By hitching her wagon to Biden, who appears to be in significant declinal mental health during the campaign, Harris could capitalize on the opportunity to take the Oval Office despite her obvious unelectability. Indeed, it's possible that all the discussion by House Speaker Nancy Pelosi about invoking the 25th Amendment on then-President Donald Trump was intended simply to educate the electorate about the procedural device for removing an infirm president from office and to condition Americans to accept it as a viable tool of honest government. Well, that way it wouldn't set off alarm bells when it eventually invoked on Biden. And of course, if Biden resigns or is removed under the 25th Amendment before 2024, Harris will have the marked advantage of running for president as an incumbent and assuredly win her party's nomination without having to go through the primary process again. Cunning and deceitful? You bet it is. Sure it is. But that's how the Democrats play. In closing, let me mention again, this program is sponsored by Lincoln Log Homes. I'm the CEO of that company, Richard Schaaf. I'll be happy to talk to you personally if you call my office. 800-848-3310. In every workday, I'll take your call. In the meantime, will you join me in praying for our republic and the preservation of our republic? Your prayers are needed. Goodbye until next week.